Hi everyone, Robert Villanueva here. This week I want to talk to you about the how to master lead follow-up. This is a really important topic for all of us, and why? Well, because 70 to 80% of our business comes from this specific source and or activity. And it's really important we understand that. Why is this important? Because I have agents that I coach all the time that fall into one of two different categories. Number one is that they do an amazing job of prospecting, and they prospect, they generate leads, they prospect, they generate leads, they prospect, they generate leads. However, they have a tendency of falling short and never following up with the leads that they generated. Hopefully you're not one of those. The second category, where agents that I coach that have a room for improvement, they'll prospect a little bit, they get leads, and then they start doing this lead follow-up over and over and over and over again in hopes that somebody will eventually change their mind. The problem with doing that is that you're not introducing any new leads to your lead follow-up system, and because of that, you're kind of going through the same murkiness of people that are not quite as motivated as you think they are. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to their motivation. This is really important. And the reason why this is important is because agents will make the mistake, unfortunately, of never finding out what is the true meaning as to their move. Why are they buying? Why are they selling? Why are they even investing? Now, what you want to do is you want to think of some questions. This goes back all the way to our grade school. Remember the questions that started with who, what, when, where, why, how, and even sometimes if. Now, what do I mean by that? Is starting questions that are going to be based on that. What is the benefit of making this move? Why is this move so important for you and your family? How soon would you like to make this move? Where is this move? Where is it you're going to? If I could get you the most amount of money as possible, think of all of those type of questions. Those questions are going to heighten your information on them in regards to what their motivation is. Now, you speak to somebody, you knock on their door, you telephone prospect them, it's a lead that's referred over to you. You never talk about their motivation, and all you talk about is, when do you want to do this? When do you want to do this? When do you want to do this? Are you ready? Are you ready? Okay, not yet? Okay, so when should I check in with you again? That's not the right way to do it. You want to know all of these details, because as you are doing with some, you're going to be following up maybe week after week, sometimes even month after month, and the more information you have, we can do our jobs better. What do I mean by that? Well, when I'm calling somebody and they tell me they want to sell their home to buy a bigger home, I'm going to ask the who, what, when, where, and whys. So when I follow up with them, I'm going to ask them questions or follow up regarding the information that they gave me. Meaning, now you mentioned to me, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that you were wanting to make this move because you wanted to put your kids in a better school district. Now, I'm looking at my calendar and we're right now in April, May, June. Now, why is that important? Because if they're looking at moving and going into a school district, you and I know that this process can take anywhere from about 60, 90, 120, and depending on the type of market we're in, up to 150 days. And we can time it up wrong if we don't create that urgency. That's just an example. So the next thing is, there's one question, just one question, that is the most important question of them all. And I tell this all the time, I ask my coaching clients all the time, what is the most important question to ask when you're doing lead follow-up? Well, the question is, what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is stopping you from making the move right now? Why is that important? Because on the other side of that question, you have one of two things that's going to happen. Number one is you are going to get what's called a condition. What's a condition? Well, a condition is something you can't overcome. Think of, for example, someone that's passed away, a loss of income, a job transfer, having a new kid, things along those lines. Now, why is this a condition? Well, think about it. You talk to somebody and they say, well, the goal is to make our move from here over to there, and over there, I'm waiting for my job. Okay, great. Well, why don't we do that now? Well, the reason I can't do that right now, Robert, is because I'm waiting for a job transfer. And until I get that job transfer, I can't make that move. That's a condition. What about, I want to buy a home, but I don't have a job? Well, that's a condition. Unless, of course, they're sitting on a pile of cash. That's a condition. So think of it from that direction. The second thing what I talked about, or going to talk about, is that of an objection. An objection could be something that is, I'd like to prefer to use it as an excuse. Well, we're thinking about making that move over to Florida, and then I asked that question, what's stopping you from making that move? And they say, well, we really don't know. I mean, we're trying to time up the market. We're hoping that we get this much for our house. We're hoping that, you know, the move that we're going to be making over to Florida or wherever that's going to be, that there's something that's going to be waiting for us. They start to get into this almost place of unknown. So when you ask that question, you can go into the direction of, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that's exactly why we need to get together. And then use that as a purpose of closing. Now, with that being said, are you in a position where you're managing leads? Or are you doing your job in closing them? Now, why is this important is because, again, it goes back to the realtors that are not doing their job. They'll just manage the leads. What does that look like? Well, it's like this. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it's Robert, your realtor, just reaching out to you. Just wanted to see if you're ready to go ahead and make that move. No, we're not ready yet. Okay, great. When should I follow up with you? And then you just find yourself doing this dance week after week after week after week, and in some cases even months. Okay, don't be that person. Be the person that's gonna close. Be the person that's gonna do exactly what it takes to get that appointment. Because in that same exact thing where the weak agent is gonna say, let me check back with you, Robert's gonna do something different. What's Robert gonna do? I'm gonna ask the most important question. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what is stopping you from making that move right now? I don't care what's on the other side of that, unless of course it's a condition, is I'm gonna say, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that is exactly why we need to get together. I mean, I'm looking at my calendar right now. I have an opening. We can do this tomorrow, or with the day after at 5 o'clock work better for us. So that's what I want you to think of when you're going through and doing your lead follow-up. So are you managing leads, or are you closing for appointments? Now, what I want you to also do is when you're doing that follow-up, don't be afraid. Sellers and or buyers and or investors should not be surprised when you're calling them. And what do I mean by that? I give them a call, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, are you ready to make this move? No, I'm not ready to make the move. Okay, well, what's stopping you from making the move? I'm just not ready. Well, when's a good idea for me to, or when's a good time? When should I? Anything from that direction, follow up with you. Well, I don't know, give me a call maybe at the end of next month. Okay, great. What I'll do is I'll call you on this day. So now you're, in a sense, setting a time for you to follow up with. So what do I have here? I have basically props, okay? I'm not like on the munchies and trying to sit here and eat M&Ms. What I wanna do is I wanna give you an analogy. And what's that analogy? Well, think of the people that are motivated and really willing to do something right then and there, okay? Those are the people that are, in a sense, green M&Ms. Everybody else are the people that are either thinking about doing something eventually, maybe, possibly, hopefully. All of those people is everything other than green M&Ms. And what do I mean by that is this. You can't turn a blue M&M into a green M&M. You can't convince somebody that's not ready to do something. You can't convince someone that just is not at that time. So what am I getting at? Is you have to be better as to the people that you're putting in your leads. Most realtors are doing this. And if you can see clearly, there are some green M&Ms in there, but it's not as many as you should. And everything else you're trying to turn into that green M&M. The other example is this one. Okay, now what is this? This is someone where you're throwing away the ones that are not as motivated. You'll get a new lead, you identify that they're not as motivated as you think they are, we'll throw them away. Okay? Now the last thing I want you to think about, separate from of course M&Ms, hopefully I gave you the munchies now, is I want you to be in a position where you can be okay with the idea of following up with leads more aggressively. Okay? Now, how many times have you been in a position where you call somebody and they tell you, oh my gosh, Robert, you know what, we already bought a home. We just listed our home last week. You know, anything from that direction. The reason that's happening is because everything I mentioned before, you're not doing your job. Okay? So you have to do a better job of course, doing the follow-up game. And for that matter, being even more aggressive in the follow-up game. You're gonna lose business by not following up enough. Will you lose some business from being too aggressive? Yeah, probably, but I'd rather err on the side of being too aggressive because I'm doing my job versus not being aggressive enough. So of course today we are talking about the how to master lead follow-up. This is a little bit of a longer video, and the reason it's a longer video is because this is probably one of the, if not the most important part of our business. Again, 70 to 80%, and for some of you it's probably more, that comes from lead follow-up. Think about it. How often are you picking up the phone, setting an appointment, and then going right out and taking that listing and or signing that contract with a buyer? It's very seldom. Most of the time, your appointments will come from this activity. So hopefully you learned an idea or two. Again, Robert Villanueva here to be of some help. I'll see you at the top.